Um, I'm not hearing you, whoever was just talking. Well, okay. So I'm going to record this. We're going to do the 20-minute break like normal. I should start out by saying I've done online stuff for over 10 years, so I'm pretty comfortable with it at one level. I'm not a big fan of synchronous learning, which is what we're doing right now online. I sort of like to have stuff in short little lectures that people can look at on their own time. But we're going to do this for now. I guess the first question I have is, does any of you guys, or do any of you guys have any specific questions or thoughts or concerns? All right, well, you know my response to silence is I'm going to assume everybody's happy campers and life is good, right? Okay, so let me start with a little lecture. I put some slides together for us. And let me get all this stuff out of the way. I got distracted. That can quit. And really, honest to God, I have slides. And we'll start here and up we go. Okay, so first things first. The quiz this week, I put it off because I lost my mom, and I'm not firing on all cylinders, which is to be expected. So I'm doing my best and getting there slowly. So this week's quiz number 7, is going to be due Sunday at midnight. I should be able to get that thing up for you guys fairly quickly now. I'm hoping either tonight or tomorrow morning. And you can do it at your leisure. It's a 10-minute quiz, 10-minute Blackboard quiz. Once you start, you got to keep going. It's open book. And do keep in mind, it's the same one we would have had in class. And still, I think you want to read through the stuff to have a good sense of what's going on in there, because trying to dig the answers out without it, don't think that'll work. But I mean, you're big boys and girls, so you choose for yourself. Quiz number 8 is now going to be due next Tuesday, April the 14th at midnight. And I put that on the syllabus, and that's online, so you can get a hold of it. And then quiz number 9, communicating online, is going to be due Tuesday, April 21. Quiz number 9 is going to be based on different material. You won't find it in the textbook. Actually, some of what we're talking about today is going to be included on it. And I'm still finding stuff that I think will be useful and interesting for us to take a look at, because I do want to focus on that a little more. And then the last week, we're going to have a presentation, and I'm going to ask you guys to put together an online presentation with your teams. And what that should look like is something we'll work on. I'm not 100% sure what that should look like. I'm open to ideas and suggestions. I'm thinking probably what would be best is if you put together a video with your team and then send that in. But I may have you do a live presentation to me. I'm not sure which is better. So bear with me, but either way, we're going to have a presentation to do. How are we doing so far? Good?
So far, so good.
So far, so good? All right. Well, so let's keep going then. We're going to look at creativity, and that relates, it turns out, to the quiz that you've got coming up. So for those of you who came to class, good for you. You get a little bit of a bonus because I'm going to cover the material in that chapter in advance. So creativity is interesting for me because that's an area of research that I specialize in. And creativity is different from artistic stuff. So if somebody's really artistic, we sometimes say, oh, that person's really creative. Well, creativity means doing something really cool and new and different. and it can apply in something as hard sciencey as engineering, say, for example, or sports. You can come up with a creative way of doing things. I don't know, you guys probably wouldn't know this, but probably your parents or grandparents might. High jumping, they started jumping over them with their head first and going over on their back. That's something that started about 40 something odd years ago. Somebody came up with that and went, holy smokes, I can jump way higher. But before that, that's not how we did high jumps. So these things that would be considered something creative. So to think about creativity, let's start by thinking about beauty and handsome. How do you judge what's beautiful, and how do you judge if somebody's handsome? And what we do is something called a social construct. Does anybody want to take a shot at outlining what a social construct would be?
Yeah, I can take a little stab at it.
Sure.
A social construct could be a bunch of different things, like, I don't know, say a race for one, or pursue policy that's focused on protecting the citizens of Tulsa. Sorry. Social construct could be like, yeah, like a race.
Hang on a sec, Hector. Somebody's got something going on in the background. Would you mind shutting that down or killing the volume, please? Go ahead. Let's give it another shot. Keep going.
Yeah, like social construct could be like a different type of like behaviors and stuff like that you're supposed to adhere to, or like I said, race is like the main one that comes to my mind.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about race being socially constructed, and I'm going to get a little more theoretical on you here. Social construction means that we kind of come to an agreement about it, and we negotiate that agreement by talking with each other. So we're communicating with each other, and then we decide what race means, and how we're going to treat and deal with race. And race itself certainly has a biological component to it. I'm white, I'm male, right? That's the way I was born. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, I can about the male stuff, but the whiteness, it is what it is, if you will. And so what does it mean for me to be white? What does it mean for me to be male? And that becomes the social construction part of it. And does that make sense for everybody? You probably run across this in the humanities, is often where we talk about that kind of thing. But here, take a look at these guys. They were considered very handsome and dignified at one time. And we can tell that that was what? How many years ago? 100 plus? And this guy's pretty fuzzy hair, same here, but those were considered mutton chops, right? And that was considered very elegant, and we saw that as elegant. We can do it with women too. And if we look through the years from 1900 through to 2010, different kinds of things were considered beautiful and different kinds of looks. And it changes as the decades go by. And there's nothing, somebody's got something going on in the background. Please help us by killing the volume on that. There's nothing specific about beauty because it changes on a regular basis, right? This lady here's got a very different look from this lady here. And that's just what we socially constructed as what considered beautiful. So creativity is also a social construct. And what exactly does that mean if it is? Well, then who knows if something is creative? How can we tell that something is creative? And what we look for is people with experience. And here's how that works. Um, Somebody who is very knowledgeable in piano playing is going to be a better judge of what's creative than the rest of us. And notice how I'm saying better, not perfect, but a better judge. When it comes to building bridges, somebody who's used to building bridges can make a better assessment if something's creative or not. Because you and I might look at a bridge and go, oh, wow, that's so cool, that's so neat. And an engineer might look at it and say, well, no, not really. It's not that creative. That kind of thinking, that kind of approach has been around forever, but we wouldn't know it because we're not an expert in that area. So the creativity then becomes defined as something that's novel and something that's useful. So it has to be different, novel. I can go to the piano, right, and I can just run my fingers across the keyboards and make all sorts of sounds, and that would be novel. Maybe nobody's ever hit the keys in that same order, but is it useful? And useful here, is it pleasant to the ear? Is it desirable? And they have to have both things. And if we want to see is something highly creative, like for instance, Mozart was seen as incredibly creative and difficult. We look back on it now and we think it's really cool. But at the time, it was really sort of earth shattering. And a lot of people were upset. Same with a guy named Tchaikovsky, a Russian um, composer. People thought his stuff was horrendous, but the music community developed a real appreciation for it over time and helped us see how it was actually creative and changed how we looked at the world, at least in terms of music and stuff. So how are we doing? Any questions so far?
I'm straight.
Anything that's going through your mind and you're wondering, well, gee, Ralph, what do you mean by... Okay, well then let's keep going. But if something's creative, we end up having stereotypes and person prototypes about it. Um, and the reason we do that is because it's uncertain. And so even experts create stereotypes and person prototypes when they have somebody pitch an idea at them. And this gets into the chapter and what Elsbeth is saying, or Elsbach is saying in her chapter. She's saying that when executives are presented with a creative idea, and they're being pitched this idea by somebody, they develop a stereotype or a person prototype that they use to assess the person providing the presentation. So when we're presenting in a business environment, she's suggesting that these person prototypes are influencing the judgment that the manager or the executive is going to make of the presentation they're getting. So that's her first big point. And I want to take off a little bit here and keep in mind, these stereotypes or person prototypes, they can be put into play in 150 milliseconds. I mean, that's fast. And they happen automatically without people even really thinking about it. And they may not even be aware that they're creating the person prototype that they use to judge the person that's making the assessment. And these things she's pointing out from the research that's done are hardwired. And we do that. And I'm going to walk into what all that means in just a moment. And it is something we naturally do. And whoops, there we go. That gets us into the areas of neurons, synapses, and neurotransmitters. And that's the hard wiring in the brain. And so the brain is influencing the stereo person prototypes that we make. And we do it automatically. And so the question then is how do we respond to it? Do we step back and say, as Hector pointed out, we have a social construction of race, and if it's a negative stereotype, do we step back and say, well, hold on a minute, that isn't necessarily true. It's the perspective I take on very quickly, but maybe I should let that go, which is something we can do. Um, in when it comes to creativity, the inclination is not to do it because it's not that much of a negative. So let's take a look here, and I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent, and I want you to take a minute or two here and grab a pen and a piece of paper, or however it is you take notes, and get ready to take notes, because the stuff we're going to talk about here is going to be on quiz number 9. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to get ready to take notes. All right. All right, that's 30 seconds. Does anybody need any more time? Okay, well, here we go. So this is a picture of neurons firing. And this is the biology. This is at a ultra microscopic level. And in our brain, you'll notice here that there's a space between neurons, and there's chemicals that move from one neuron to the other. And these are nerve endings. And these chemicals provide signals that go through our brains and result in what we call thinking. Okay, maybe I can give you an example here. We all know what Prozac is, right? And Prozac helps people get less depressed. And Prozac provides um, a, an inhibitor. And what it does, it inhibits the uptake of serotonin. So the medicine goes into here, and it keeps this end of the neuron from picking up too much serotonin, or an uptake inhibitor, because if you take up too much of that stuff, you get depressed. And so there's some evidence to suggest that there's a certain biological component to depression. Some of us are just simply more likely to get depressed than others. And these guys fly back and forth. There are electrical charges in this electrochemical soup that they're in. So let's take a step further back. This is some recent photography that we've done of the brain. A guy was working in a lab, and you can see that these things are enclosed in little sacs. And these nerve endings, they can be like from the brain all the way down to the bottom of your legs. These nerves can be huge, sending information back and forth at milliseconds, like ultra fast. And it might be interesting to you to know we have more of these in our tummy than we have in our brain. And to me, that's fascinating, right? There's more neurotransmitters in our tummy than there are in our brain. But anyway, so this is the physical stuff of our brain, of our nervous system, that shoots images, that shoots information back and forth. And so it's, of course, influenced by the 5 senses, right? We touch things, we smell things, we see things, right? We have our inputs, and that influences the firing of the neurons, right? We talk and we listen as well. And then that gets processed. And it gets processed first by the amygdala, which we could say is what is part of the lizard brain that we have, if you will. And it's at an incredibly basic level. And it actually takes in this information and causes us to have feelings before we've even thought about stuff. So we see an image, we see somebody in front of us, a white male, let's say, and we immediately have feelings because of because of the amygdala and how it responds to the inputs that we get. This part up here is where we think about it some more and process it, but here it's automatic. We don't even get a chance to think about it. And so if you look at this thing here, you probably notice that there's sort of a face here. And many of you, I'm sure, probably recognize that right away because that's an image that we're used to, right? And here's the homunculus, as we call it, the perceptual homunculus that our brain has of a human body. Now think about that for a minute. When we look at each other, the hands are the most important thing that our brains process. We don't know why exactly yet, but it's what we do. And then you can see the lips are huge, and the tongue and the chin, and then the ears and nose and eyes, and the body we focus on less. That's just how we see the things that we see as most important when we're looking at other people. Now, I think that's sort of fascinating. I don't think this is particularly attractive, but it's a representation of how our brain processes information. We never see each other this way. We see each other differently, of course, but this is where we put our emphasis. So when we meet somebody, remember at the beginning of class, we shook hands because handshaking and hands are hugely important. So that's why handshaking developed as something that human beings do. We present each other our hands so that we can make our very first connection with each other. Now, there's tons of theories as to why we think hands are important, and I'm going to stay away from that because I don't know that much about it. But then we're concerned about the person's lips and their tongue and their mouth area. And then we start focusing on here, the ears, the eyes, and then we start to worry about the body as least important of the things that we look at. And you can see here that this is different from what we see here and here and here and here again. And my point is there's a change here in how we communicate online. Getting practical. When we're in a Zoom classroom, we tend to see only the faces of people, right? And if you scroll through the little pictures, we tend to only see our heads and faces. So the experience we have of working in a Zoom classroom is very different from the experience that we have in our on the ground classroom, right? Because the thing that we focus on the most is really put there. So in a sense, what we can expect, especially when it's set up so that the talker is the person whose image we see the most, we can, in a way, possibly make better, stronger connections or better understanding of each other than we might when we're dealing in a classroom situation. Now, I think that that's kind of cool. I don't know about you guys, but I think that that's kind of interesting that we're now in an environment where we see and understand each other in a really different way. So let me stop sharing here for a minute and let's put this on pause.